Hello, U.S. History students. Mr. Nielsen here, bringing you the first installment in the John Brown Documents review videos. This is John Brown Document A and Questions, but before we get into it, we actually have to go over some notes. So we're going to go ahead and start with some notes. Remember that this is during the years leading up to the United States Civil War. The primary issue of the United States Civil War was slavery, and so this also will have something to do with slavery. This takes place in 1859, which is only 2 years before, and in fact is actually less than 2 years before the start of the American Civil War. And so, starting with number one, some notes. In 1859, the states in the North, I'll call them the North from now on, and the states in the South, which I'll call the South, had a huge disagreement where each side was very angry with the other, and this huge disagreement was that they could not decide whether slavery would continue. There were many people in the North who wanted slavery to end immediately, and we call these people abolitionists because they wanted to abolish slavery. Some abolitionists were peaceful, and they rejected all forms of violence altogether. Other abolitionists thought it would be necessary to use violence to end slavery, and they also thought that people who held other people as slaves and whipped them deserved violence against them. They thought it was justice to, commit violence against people who had committed violence against, other people, perhaps even their whole lives. So, as these documents are called John Brown, right? This folder is the John Brown folder. We're going to study a man named John Brown, and John Brown was an abolitionist, but he wasn't just any abolitionist. He was a violent abolitionist. In fact, it is known that John Brown led a group into an area and murdered 5 people shortly before all these events take place in 1859. So even before the events that we're going to read about, which involve violence, John Brown was already a known murderer. So that's the bad part of John Brown. He was a violent murderer. If there's a good part about John Brown, and I would argue there are some very good things about John Brown, is that he was not racist. Like, this is a time period in American history where every white person, literally almost every single white person, was racist. And he was like the one white person you could find who was not actually racist. He did believe that African Americans and whites were equal. Genuinely believed that. And like I said, this was extremely rare for the time. I would say that's a good thing about him. Does it offset the fact that he murdered 5 people? Probably not. But in that sense, he was a good person in at least one way. He was also a very religious man, and he thought that God hated slavery and that God wanted slavery to end, and he thought he was doing his religious duty by doing anything he could to help end slavery. And so on October 16th, 1859, John Brown attacked an arsenal. An arsenal is a place where guns and ammunition are stored. And this arsenal was owned by the U.S. government, so it had a lot of guns and ammunition. Like I said, this takes place less than 2 years before the start of the Civil War. And so the North and the South are already very angry at each other. And then you have this event that shocks both sides, big time. You could actually kind of compare it to like a school shooting today, where when people hear about it, they don't even know what to think. Like, it's so shocking to them. It's violent. People were killed. And they were really kind of scared and saddened, but mostly just shocked that this happened. John Brown had a plan, and his plan was to steal the guns and ammunition and give them the guns and ammunition to enslaved people, so that the enslaved people could gain their own freedom, using violence, fighting if they had to. But John Brown said that that was not his intent, that he wasn't meaning to give enslaved people guns so that the enslaved people could shoot people. He said he wanted to give them guns so that they could convince the people who claimed to own them that they would just let them go rather than get shot by an enslaved person with a gun. This was John Brown's plan. His plan failed, and he was arrested at the arsenal before he was able to escape, before he was able to get any guns out to any enslaved people. After he was arrested, he was put on trial, he was found guilty, and he was hanged to death. In the North, many people disagreed with John Brown's actions, so they thought what he did was wrong, but they thought he was a brave hero because he gave his life, he sacrificed his life in order to try to end slavery. Oh, another thing to know about John Brown, I think I mentioned it above, but just as a quick reminder, John Brown was white. He was a white abolitionist. There were many white abolitionists at this time, but not many of them had demonstrated that they were willing to die to try to end slavery. And so for John Brown to be a white abolitionist who was willing to sacrifice his life to try to end slavery was something that a lot of people thought he was very brave for, that he was a hero, to die to try to end slavery. That was in the North. People in the South thought John Brown was crazy, they thought he was dangerous, and they hated him for trying to end slavery. And they thought he was dangerous because, it was his plan to give enslaved people guns. And if, all of the enslaved people live in the South, and all the people who are keeping them in slavery are Southerners, white Southerners, of course white Southerners are going to be afraid of a man who wants to give their slaves, their enslaved people, guns, because they're afraid that the enslaved people will then shoot them with those guns. And so people in the South who were enslaving African Americans, they thought John Brown was crazy. They thought he was crazy for thinking that African Americans were equal to whites. They thought he was crazy for what he did, and they thought he was dangerous, and all in all, they hated him for what he did and also what he believed, equality and ending slavery. So, moving up to the documents. Okay, we have document A, which is titled John Brown's Speech. And so this is the little bit of background information. John Brown gave this speech after he was arrested, put on trial, and found guilty of murder and trying to start a slave rebellion. When he was giving this speech, he knew he was going to be executed for the crimes for which he was found guilty. So this is after the trial. This is after John Brown has been found guilty, right? When John Brown is saying these words, he already knows he is going to die by hanging. So, pick it up from here. I have, may it please the court, a few words to say. In the first place, I deny everything but what I have all along admitted, the design on my part to free the slaves. That was all I intended. I never did intend murder, or treason, or the destruction of property, or to excite or incite slaves to rebellion, or to make insurrection. I'll pause reading for a second. So in this, John Brown is saying the only thing that he was trying to do was to free enslaved African Americans. He was not, he didn't want to murder anyone. He didn't want to give enslaved African Americans guns so that they could murder anyone. He just wanted to do whatever he could do to free people who were in slavery. So I'll continue reading. I have another objection. Had I so interfered in behalf of the rich, the powerful, the intelligent, the so-called great, or in behalf of any of their friends, it would have been all right, and every man in this court would have deemed it an act worthy of reward rather than punishment. So, pause again. What he's saying here is that if you took all of the exact same things that he did, that he was arrested for, and then found guilty for, and that he's about to be executed for, those actions, he did them to help enslaved people. He's saying, if you take all those same things I did, but I do those things instead to help rich people, you're not going to arrest me and execute me. You're going to thank me and pat me on the back and call me great. So it's not what I did that was wrong. You just hate that I tried to help enslaved people, right? All those same actions would be great if I did it to help rich people. So that's what John Brown is saying here. So continue. I believe that to have done what I have done on behalf of God's despised poor was not wrong, but right. Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life to further the end of justice, and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children and with the blood of millions in this slave country whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust acts, I say, so let it be done. So he basically ends by saying, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to help, enslaved African Americans. And if that means that you guys are going to arrest me and, execute me for trying to help enslaved African Americans, then do it. Because I didn't do a thing wrong, and, I don't care what you do to me. I wouldn't change a thing. I did what was right, and I would rather die doing what was right than, have never done anything like that. So, we'll move on to the questions. So document A, question number 1. John Brown delivered this speech on the last day of his trial after hearing the jury pronounce him guilty. He knew he would be sentenced to die. Based on that, what can you infer about him as a person from the speech he gave? So, what do you think you know about John Brown based on all of this that he said, knowing that he said this, knowing that he's going to die, right? So he gives the speech, and all the time he's thinking, man, they're going to kill me. They're going to execute me. So what is the last thing I'm going to say? And so this is what he wants to say after people say, yeah, you're guilty, and we're going to execute you for your crimes. Okay. So now I want you to find 3 pieces of evidence from the speech that support what you inferred about John Brown as a person. So if you think John Brown is brave, if you think he's crazy, if you think he's mad, if you think he's a good person, a bad person, whatever, whatever you wrote here, give me 3 pieces of evidence from the speech that prove that he is what you said he was here. Okay. Now, this is important information for A, B, and C. So we're going to go over this real quick. A misguided fanatic is a person who understands good actions and bad actions, but not completely, and is super passionate to the point of being obsessed about something. Okay? So someone who understands good actions and bad actions but not completely, we call that person misguided. And somebody who's super passionate to the point of being obsessed, we call that person fanatic. Okay, so if we put the two words together, we get a misguided fanatic. So an example of a misguided person is a person who breaks into rich people's homes and steals from them, but then gives all that money to the poor. So they understand good and bad. They just don't really get it in the same way that you and I and other people get it, right? Because it's wrong to steal from people, but if you're trying to help poor people and you're stealing from rich people, like you're trying to think of the right thing to do. You're doing a bad thing trying to do a good thing. That's misguided. Okay. An example of a fanatic is somebody who spends all their time and energy and like all their money on one thing that they care so much about, right? So, that sports fan who literally has covered the all of their walls and their whole home, with posters and everything else, and only wears jerseys and stuff of their favorite team. That's like a true fanatic, somebody who's just absolutely obsessed with something. And so, based on the speech here and what you know about John Brown, is John Brown a misguided fanatic? Why or why not? If you think he is a misguided fanatic, give me 3 pieces of evidence that show from this speech. Give me 3 pieces of evidence that show he's a misguided fanatic. If you think no, John Brown is not a misguided fanatic, okay, tell me why not. And then give me 3 pieces of evidence from the speech that show no, John Brown is not a misguided fanatic. Okay, so read the speech and tell me either yes, John Brown is a misguided fanatic, then say why, and give me 3 pieces of evidence that show he is, or say no, John Brown is not a misguided fanatic, tell me why not, and find 3 pieces of evidence that show he was not a misguided fanatic. Do all that, and you're done with document A. Remember, document A, B, C, and the culminated question, along with 3 other folders, are due Friday, May 22nd. That is this Friday.